Say Valerie Jerome is an Olympic athlete, an activist, an educator, a VSB teacher for your career. And your brother taught at Templeton as a coach and as a teacher, and in Richmond as well. And I just want to acknowledge the contributions that your family has made. And so without further ado, I bring you all Valerie Jerome. Thanks for being here, Valerie.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Am I speaking loud enough or not loud enough? Is there a comment there?
You're excellent.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Perfect.
I want to start my talk with just a little bit of history of this area, which really set the stage for some of the nightmarish experiences that we had growing up in Vancouver. So I'll start with the fact that the British Empire had Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada as places to create extensions of the empire with all white communities. And they brought a lot of British people here from the British Isles, and through the early part of the 20th century, they advertised all over Europe to bring immigrants to Canada to fill up the land, to farm, to start the industries. And so the case for Canada is the same for New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa. The Indigenous people, of course, were rounded up and put on reservations. The laws restricting immigration of people of color was put in place. And in Canada, it was 1909 that Sir Wilfrid Laurier established the law that 100 Black people per year could immigrate to Canada. It didn't matter their country of origin. They could be from Africa, the Caribbean, or wherever, but they were limited to 100, and people from India and Ceylon were limited to 50 people per year. And of course, we had the Chinese head tax as well as the exclusion laws keeping Asian immigration down as well. And those laws here in our country more or less went out the door too many decades later when actually Pierre Elliott Trudeau opened our immigration. Now, there were some students who were often allowed into Canada. I know that UBC had an influx of Jamaican and Trinidadian immigrants in the mid-50s. Caribbean Students Association was quite popular at UBC. But for countries like Australia, they didn't change their laws about allowing Black people into their country until 1978. And I think the first Black person they let in was actually a Lebanese man. But Canada, started working on it in 1956. And then, of course, it was about 1968 when we sort of, allowed people of color to come as immigrants. And as you know, the situation in South Africa was pretty appalling. And New Zealand actually, I think, did a bit better than Canada did. But still, these British laws meant that we were a very, very white country. And it was meant to be that way. Just 2 weeks ago, I was over at West Van High for a sod turning ceremony. And they invited the students to come out to the field to join us. And I was just astounded that perhaps 80% of the student population at West Vancouver Secondary actually has Asian origins. When I lived in North Vancouver, there were no Asian people other than what people called the Chinaman, the man who delivered vegetables. In North Vancouver, there weren't Chinese people, there weren't African people, people of African origin, just our family. So it's interesting to see how the population has changed. And I think sometimes young people of today don't understand what the foundation has been for all of this racism that we continue to face here. And I think it's because for people who are not of color, it's been pretty much their country, their rules. I mean, when I was first in school, we sang God Save the King in the morning, and then later, of course, God Save the Queen. But, you know, the Queen Victoria weekend was such a big deal. Everybody had to do this maypole dancing. Christmas time, the grocery stores listed the Brazil nuts as nigger toes. Teachers even used the expression eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a nigger by the toe. Nigger was quite a common word. It wasn't considered a bad thing to say that in the 50s. So I'll start my family story with the fact that in 1951, my father and his good friend on the CNR railway, Porter's committee was trying to get better rights in Winnipeg for the Black porters, and so the CNR transferred my dad out to Vancouver. So my dad thought it would be a safer place for us to be over in North Vancouver, not downtown, in the Strathcona region, which came with a few risks. He felt since he was away so much, probably 5 days a week, sometimes only 4 days a week. But when you're a porter, you were gone and your family was on its own. So we moved to a little street called Lion Place, just across the road from Ridgeway Elementary School. And there had been a petition in the neighborhood to block our purchasing the house. They didn't want residents. Most neighborhoods had covenants and still have covenants on their properties, although they can't be enforced any longer, saying you wouldn't sell your property to a Jew, a Black, or an Asian. So the Lower Lonsdale wasn't sophisticated enough to have the covenant on the property. So City Hall turned down the petition and we moved in. And it was interesting, the very first day of school in September, you know, the children were ready for us, obviously conducted by their parents as some type of junior militia, because the parents' petition had failed. The parents really still wanted that school to be white. So all of these children who had never met us, never seen us, were ready with their piles of stones and just pelted us relentlessly until we turned and ran back into our own backyard and stayed there for a couple of days until my father actually came home from his railway trip, because our mother had a very sad history of racism within her own family, and she didn't have any self-confidence to take us back. I don't know that she even thought we were worthy of the education being offered at Ridgeway School. But anyway, when my dad came back, he marched us across the street to Ridgeway School and went into the office to see the principal. And so my older brother, Harry, my older sister, Carolyn, my younger brother, Barton, who was, used the word retarded in those days, but mentally challenged, or intellectually challenged, we stood out on the grounds, and these kids who'd never met us, but who had been so willing to kick up the dust and call us all these vile names, and they were no longer throwing the stones, but they were a mob surrounding us. And one of the most significant events of my life happened as we stood waiting for the principal to come out and tell us it was okay for us to be there. A little girl, red-haired, freckles, thick glasses, grade 2, separated herself from the mob and came and stood with us. Now, I have experienced over the decades many times when I had hoped my teaching colleagues or my friends would dare to be Annabelles. You know, people are often silent when horrific things are going on, and for whatever reason, they don't often feel they can stand up or stand beside us. So that image of Annabelle Mackenzie, this little girl, her mother had been the only person on our street to not sign the petition that had failed. Anyway, we eventually heard from the principal. He came out of the building with my dad and announced to the kids that, you know, we had a right to be in the building, and, you know, the nasty business had stopped. Well, of course, the nasty business didn't stop. They didn't really have very good models in their homes. These children were obviously directed by their parents. Why else were they so ready for us? And of course, many teachers were wonderful, but there certainly were a lot of teachers who were not helpful in these situations. So we spent a number of years at Ridgeway School and went on to Sutherland Junior High School and found our way through some very good times and also some very, very disappointing times. But eventually, my older brother and I got involved in athletics, and Harry, as many of you might know, set 7 world records during his, well, just star-studded career as an athlete. And he was punished for being Black. Our Canadian press, when he was injured, called him a quitter. He was vilified. When we came home from the Rome Olympics in 1960, he had been injured in the semifinal, tore his hamstring. The Canadian team managers, of course, weren't at all interested in Harry. They were betting against him. They bragged about this in the paper, that they had been betting against Harry, being the world record holder, that he would even win a medal or that he wasn't good enough. So when he was injured, the Canadian press labeled him a quitter. Now, the doctor on the British team declared Harry's leg severely torn. He didn't think he'd run again. The doctor from the German team examined Harry because the German runner Armin Hari had won the 100-meter final, and because these two men were the world record holders in the 100, they were hoping for a rematch or a race to be set up in the coming weeks or months. Well, the German doctor was convinced Harry would not run again on that leg. So we had all this horrific press. Harry came home to, name calling of being quitter. He sat in a restaurant in downtown Vancouver, a very nice restaurant, Scott's Cafe. None of you will remember it because it's been long gone, but it was a very shishy restaurant on Granville, just off Georgia. And he and our good friends were sitting having a meal, and a man came up to Harry in this restaurant and said, "Are you Harry Jerome?" And Harry stood up and extended his hand to say, "Yes, I am." And the man said loudly for everyone in the restaurant to hear, "You're the biggest bastard in this country. You have shamed us." Now, Harry was 19 years old. He had run his best. And this is what our country thought of him. Now, obviously, not everybody thought that, but there was enough pain along the way. And in 1962, 2 years later, he totally severed his left quadricep muscle on his left leg. His leg was as thin as a baby's arm. His muscle was absolutely gone. He was flown home. He was flown home from the Commonwealth Games in Australia, operated on, spent months in a cast, and, had to learn how to walk and run again. And yet, the country, of course, the headlines were, Jerome quits again. And even 20 years later, when he died, Maclean's magazine bothered to call him a quitter in the obituary that they printed, and that he had ignominiously withdrawn from the Olympic Games in 1960. So the racism never really ended. Harry would set a world record on a weekend, and 2 days later, he'd be knocking on the doors of all kinds of apartments in this city, trying to rent an apartment. And no, he couldn't rent. We always seemed to have had to get white people to go and rent apartments. The same thing happened for my dad after he retired from the railway. I went with him to dozens of hotels in the South Granville area. And we were just told it's taken. And yet for rent signs remained. This city has been very harsh for people of color. And as a teacher, I found that racism existed within our school system. And I have some pretty horrific stories of really inappropriate remarks, comments, behaviors on behalf of our administrators and my fellow teachers. And I would really like to see some type of, they do They do police checks, even if you're applying to be a volunteer at a soccer game or whatever. I'd really like to see us have some type of test, scoring sheet, whatever, when we hire people who become our teachers, ultimately our principals. I think there should be gatekeepers at the University of British Columbia's education faculty. I've had really racist teachers in my student teachers in my classrooms, and I have wanted to fail them because they didn't want to have to talk to a Jew, or because they, felt that the Musqueam kids weren't as good anyway. You know, the university, of course, always wanted to just, well, let them drop out now and re-enroll. I don't want them to have a failure on their cards. Well, they should fail. Small children in classrooms, and I'll give you an example of the year of COVID, the year after COVID. A school very close to me had a little girl whose father has been hired here in our banking system. He's educated people. They're from West Africa. Anyway, the little girl's being called nigger at her school. This is 2021. And the father went to the school and said, this is inappropriate. And the principal's response was, well, we didn't have any racism here until you came. I'm not talking about the 1950s. I'm not talking about the 1990s. I'm talking about, the 2020s. And I think we need some way of removing people. I don't think they should even be allowed into the Faculty of Education. But I think at every level, whether it be an administrator in a school, my first principal in 1964, I was at Selkirk School. Before we'd go on a field trip, he'd always say, oh, give me that little darky over there. We've got to strap somebody and have these kids behave when they're on the field trip. And I'd say, Mr. Harper, these kids are very well behaved. They will not misbehave. No, give me a little darky. So it was either, Surinder, who was South Asian, or Barbara, who was Black. And, that person shouldn't have even been in the school system. And the last few years that I taught, I had a man teaching in the classroom next to me who never would take the children who, were challenged or had difficulties and needed to have an SEA. I don't know what you call SEAs now, but student assistants. And he'd say, well, I don't want to have any of those kids in my class because then I'll have to have a white nigger in my room, that being an SEA. I don't even know how a person like that keeps their job. Or the principal at that school, when I reported that the little girl was being called nigger, she had just come here from Haiti. And, well, she deserved to be called nigger. She probably kicked somebody in the nuts. This was the principal's response at a staff meeting. Teachers, like policemen, like everybody else, they're a cross section of our society. And the same way that we see, Selwyn Romilly, an 81-year-old judge, being assumed to be a 39-year-old robber. It's funny, people were horrified that the police made that error. I'm willing to bet that most white Vancouverites, I won't say most, I'll say 50% of white Vancouverites make the same errors. I'm asked all the time, were you I saw you at the New Republic bookstore. I said, no, I've never been there. No, I haven't been there. Yes, you have. I saw you there. Or you used to work at where else on 4th Avenue? No, I don't, but I know who you're talking about. And we really don't even look alike. I find that often people of color are confused by people because all they see is our color. They don't see us as individual people. And I think of the notion that people sort of, I guess, are more interested in people of their own tribe. And it took me 32 years to get this book published. I went to many publishers, but a couple of them are really notable rejections. One was I was given an appointment with a vice president at a very large, prestigious firm in Toronto. And this woman said to me as I handed her the book, I said, well, it centers around the track and field career of my brother, Harry Jerome. He was an Olympian. My grandfather was an Olympian, but Harry was really well known. She says, I've never heard of Harry Jerome. Now, I have to tell you, Toronto is quite different from Vancouver. They don't have a Harry Jerome Rec Center, and they don't have our family there. But every year from 1983, the year after Harry died, the city of Toronto hosts a very large event called the Harry Jerome Awards. I went to it from 1984 when I started going, and I was going until about 2006. So I went, and almost every single year that I went, the Prime Minister was there. I met Brian Mulroney many times and Jean Chrétien. The Premier was there, the Lieutenant Governor, the Governor General, and really sort of the elite of the city. And the Toronto Star would always publish a special section the week before the Harry Jerome Awards, showing all the nominees, people in music, entertainment, the nominees in academics, the nominees in sports, and they would do these feature articles. And then after the awards, they would, announce with photographs and everything, who the winners were in each category. So I thought to myself, here's this woman, vice president of a publishing company. She must be able to read. She must probably read the newspaper. And I would think that as she reads the newspaper, if she's never heard of Harry Jerome living in the city of Toronto, when she comes to articles about Black people, well, they're not her tribe. It's a bit like me when I go through the papers. I don't necessarily read the comics. I'm not interested. They're not my tribe, I'll say. Or I didn't always read. Some people skip the sports section. They're not interested in sports. And a lot of, I think, white people, when they see the articles are about Black people, it's not their tribe and they don't read it. And I think that happens a lot for people who are what I call hyphenated Canadians. We Black Canadians, Indo-Canadians, you're a Canadian as long as you're white, 2 years after, or 10 years after, or one generation after you come here from Europe or a country that has a Caucasian population, you're a Canadian. You're not hyphenated. But people, no matter how long they've been here, my friend Fay Wong's parents, great-great-great-grandparents came to build the railway. People still call her Chinese Canadian. And it's the good thing about sports. If your name goes up on the scoreboard, Andre Degrassi, it doesn't say Black Canadian. When Laurie Fung won her gymnastics medal, it didn't say Chinese Canadian. You're a full Canadian. And I must say, although it's really nice that people have Black History Month and acknowledge us for a month and find out a little bit more about us each year, I'd like to be just a Canadian. But it's not possible unless you really are Caucasian. And I don't hear anyone calling my friend Alva Jensen a Swedish Canadian. I don't hear people calling my friend Dixie an Irish Canadian. But for people of color, we're Filipino Canadian. And I'd really like to see some movement there. Now, my book goes on to give quite a story of there's a lot of sadness in the first half of the book because our lives were very affected by the racism my mother faced when she was growing up. And I don't want to tell you a lot about that, but my grandfather had run in the 1912 Olympics. He's a Black man, my mother's father. And she was ashamed of him her whole life. We had these big silver cups in the cupboards. We weren't allowed to ask who John Armstrong Howard was. We couldn't mention his name. And she was ashamed of who she was, half Black and half white. My grandfather had tried to enlist in World War I when it first broke out, but of course they didn't take Black Canadians. It wasn't until so many white Canadians were dead that they let the rest of us join. And when the war was over, the Americans and the Canadians were not happy to bring their Black soldiers home. I guess they thought maybe we'd fade into the background in Europe. But anyway, my grandfather was over there for quite a while, as were the other Black soldiers, and he met My grandmother, a white English woman, and of course there were race riots going on in Liverpool and in London at the time because so many black soldiers from the United States and Canada were still there and were dating white women, God forbid. And so my grandfather came home, and about 6 months later, my grandmother arrived from England with my mother, an infant in her arms, and they married in Winnipeg. Nobody would rent to them. A mixed race couple was even more vile and unattractive than a straight black couple. So they went to the town of St. Rose du Lac to settle there because they couldn't rent in Winnipeg. And they were stoned out of that little village, and they wandered and eventually settled and homesteaded up near the Crane River Indian Reservation. And when their marriage fell apart, my grandmother had these 3 half-black daughters and a white daughter that had been fathered by somebody in the community up there because my grandfather was away working on the trains in Winnipeg and coming back and forth up to northern Manitoba. And so my grandmother moved into this town of Dauphin, and she had these 3 half-black girls and a fully white girl. And when she met a man whom she wanted to remarry, he said, well, we can take the white one, but we're not taking these 3 half-black girls. I don't want them in my house. So my mother was put out to work, 13. My Aunt Connie was sent to a reform school because she used to run away. She was 11. And my Aunt Kay was taken in by her grade 4 teacher. She was 9 years old. And my Aunt Kay, who was being raised by her teacher, lived right across the street from her very own mother, who was white, an English woman, with a white daughter from another relationship, and this man who was white, who despised black people, just despised them. So it's been racism, makes an impact that just doesn't go away in one generation. It doesn't go away because you get an education. It doesn't go away because you want it to go away. The racism that affected my mother stayed with her whole life. She didn't like herself. She didn't believe in herself. And it was very hard for her to ever consider advocating for us, and she was brutal. It's not a happy story. So people think that, in one generation you can fix these problems. I think this point of my book is that I really am hopeful that people can be aware of the long-term effects. Surely finding out about Indigenous schools and the buried children at these Indigenous residential schools will help open the eyes of Canadians to the long-term effects. I listened to a parent from the Kamloops residential school. She was on Anderson Cooper on American television and saying, my mother beat us and I beat my children and my daughters are beating their kids. It's long term. It doesn't go away because you think, oh, well, that happened way back then. It must be over now. So I think we need to teach our children about racism. We need to raise the subject. As I've said in my book, a quote from James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And that's my hope, that we will begin to do a better job of facing our history. I hope there are some questions. I'm sure I've raised some issues with some of you.
I thank you for the wonderful talk. Um, it's kind of a silly question. I was just wondering, when did your brother teach at Templeton?
He taught there, he was there 65, 66, 67.
Before my time then. I
Before you
went
were born, long before you were born, yeah. This
Oh,
is
I was born in 1970,
yeah.
so
Mhm.
a bit after, yeah. I went to Templeton, and my son currently goes to Templeton, and yeah, so
Well,
thank
I'll
you.
be speaking next week. I hope your son shows up to the talk.
Um, I don't know. He's in a special ed class, so I don't know. But yeah, I'll ask his teacher. Thanks. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
I'll see if I can wrangle an invitation though. And maybe Sandra, you and I can go.
There's a hand up, I see.
Oh, yeah, may I? Or
Yes.
there's, sorry, Laura, did you want to go?
You can go ahead. I can go next.
Thank you so much for speaking. I listened to it with my daughter and was explaining along the way. Um, I'm looking forward to reading your book, and I'm wondering if you're considering writing a kind of a version of your story that could be read in schools to elementary school children.
No, I haven't considered that because I have a number of other things
I bet you're
I do.
busy.
Yeah. So, I'm going to be 80 this year, and I don't know how much time I've got for how many, considering how long it took to get this one published. If I take that kind of time, I'll probably only get to one more instead of maybe a half dozen.
Right.
So thank you. That's certainly, I think somebody named Norma Charles, who used to teach in the Vancouver system, she wrote a children's book. It's not terribly accurate, but it is available, and it is a kid's story, and I can't remember the name of it. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll look for that too.
Hi. Thank you so much for speaking. That was amazing, very moving. Where did you find the strength? You're at this school and you're facing that reaction to as a small child, and if your mother had the issues that she did and wasn't advocating for you, how did you do that? How did you find the strength? Who did you lean on?
Well, there were three of us. My younger brother was actually not long I told you he was mentally handicapped. He was not long at the school. They strapped him, believe it or not. So we did to little grade 1 kids who aren't learning to read fast enough. So he was eventually removed from the school and was sent to another school, which was a good thing. But for the three of us, Harry, Carolyn, and I, and I do have a younger sister, but she wasn't born until 1954, so she doesn't make it into much of the book. But well, not all kids are bad, right? I told you, I mentioned little Annabelle. I had some friends. Harry really used sport as a way of managing his hurt and his frustration and anger, and he really he was very good at being able to keep things under wraps and then go and kick a soccer ball or, hit a tennis ball or run or, he was very, very, very athletic and used up the energy. But both my sister and I, we did find friends. Not all kids are bad. I had a few friends. I was very fortunate at, when I first went to Ridgeway School, grade 2, my grade 2 teacher let me stay in at recess, and she would let me stay in after school, and my friend Annabelle and we'd actually walk her home from school. And I found the playground really quite traumatizing. Once I was in the classroom, I was fine. So I usually was late for school almost every single day. Number one, I wouldn't eat the cold, ugly porridge that was in front of me. I hated it. My mother wasn't going to let me go to school until the porridge was eaten. And that way I delayed having to face the playground. Whereas my sister, as has just been mentioned, who, took on the City Hall and as well as the CNR and the Great Northern Railways, she was always a bit of a fighter, and it's more her character. So, she made friends, she fought battles, and, it's not the best way to grow up. And what was really good, I had probably 2 or 3 good teachers at that school. But sport became a great safety net, a haven for Harry and me. when Harry goes to Oregon, that's an interesting part of the book, because of course there the racism is legitimized, it's in law, and that he really struggled with. But being a track hero in many instances, University of Oregon adopted thousands of people would come out to watch him run. So again, he coped by being this remarkable athlete, you know. So, you know, for me, I'm very good at advocating for my students and for other people. I'm just not good at advocating for myself. And so I tend to withdraw, but I'll fight anybody to the mat for my students and for my younger brother Barton, but for myself, because I didn't ever learn to value myself. I mean, our mother told us we were ugly every day of our lives. And you know, you can believe in other people, but you don't necessarily learn to believe in yourself. And so that has always been a challenge for me. Yeah. Mhm. So I
I
didn't
have,
always cope. So
I
when you
have a
say,
question.
yeah. Mhm.
I really want to know what it felt like when you won the big races that you did win.
Mhm.
How did you feel?
Well, I have to say you know, we joined this wonderful track club. Our coach, John Minichello, was a teacher in the Vancouver system for decades, a wonderful, wonderful man. He died just a couple of years ago. Um, you know, we loved going to track because it was a way of releasing all this pent up tension and unhappiness that we not only had outside, but we had it in the home as well. And so track was a great release. I never thought of myself as being a winner or competitive. I mean, I liked it when I did, but I mainly ran the track workouts were as wonderful for me as were the competitions. I just loved the freedom I felt. I was judged by how fast I was going or how far I jumped in the long jump. It wasn't a matter of having to prove myself as being a worthwhile human being. I was accepted because the marks were adequate. So in 1959, we went to the Pan American Game trials. We didn't even know about the Pan American Games, which was the Canadian Championships. And unlike the Canadian Championships of today, and I just have to tell you a side story here. When we ran in 1959 and 1960, Harry and I were the only Black people at the Canadian Championships. And many years later, I was down on Georgia Street, walking along in front of the bay, and they had all these television screens on in the window of the bay. And they were showing the final of the men's 100 meters at the Canadian Championships. And I was stunned because every man on the start line was Black. And nothing could have been more different from how it had been when we were athletes. So when we went to Winnipeg in 1959 to run those Canadian Championships, I was shocked, absolutely shocked. I was 15 years old. I just had my 15th birthday. And I won the women's 60. I won this is competing against senior women. All these other women are in university or beyond, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I won the 60. I won the 100 meters. I won the long jump. And I came third in the high jump. And I was on our winning relay team. It was brand new news to me. I had not thought of myself as being a star or a winner or whatever. I was, you know, it was great. And the sad thing was the next year when we went to the Canadian Championships, we were met at the airport by the media, and then there were a great crowd of people out to photograph us as we were warming up and it was the Olympic trials. And I thought, holy God, they expect me to win again. You know, that was a big surprise to me. You win once and oh my gosh, you know. So that sort of unnerved me. And of course, in those days, we didn't even ever think of having a bottle of water at a track meet or, you know, eating properly or doing anything. So yeah, it was, I didn't like the pressure of having been a winner. I loved to do the running. As a matter of fact, just recently, CBC did a program called Black Life, and I had never seen a film of myself running. And in this show called Black Life, it's on CBC Gem now, I actually saw film footage of, I mean, I've seen still photographs of myself running, but I'd never seen myself running. And it was a really eerie feeling at age almost 80 to see, you know, that I was this tall, skinny kid. And that was me, you know, it was It was a treat. It was a real treat. So yeah, running, it had two sides to it. It brought pressure. Harry loved the pressure. He could handle it. He was really good. I don't know whether any of you watched a TV series called The Last Dance. It's about Michael Jordan. And one of the things you find out about Michael Jordan is that he was fueled by anger. He find some slight that somebody had done something wrong, and he would use it to just, well, Harry didn't go looking for slights. There were many slights that came his way and many insults. And he was able to just walk right by people, not respond, but he'd get out to the track and he'd just lay it all out on the track. So he could handle the pressure. He was using all the fuel of all the insults and hurts that he dealt with at home and at school and elsewhere. So yeah, I wasn't good at that. If something went wrong at the track meet, I sort of fell apart and, oh my God, they won't let me use my own starting blocks. And, it would rattle me. But he was a very different type of competitor for me. And I went out to track because he made me come. He said, what are you staying at home for? So you can get beaten, get smacked, get in an argument. So I went and I loved it. So yeah, but I didn't have the same level of commitment.
First off, thank you very much, Valerie. I have really enjoyed hearing about your experience. Well, I'm not sure enjoyed is the right word, but I value your time and understanding what you've been through. I'm curious what brought you to teaching. What made you want to go into that field? Or...
Very simple. I had some really wonderful teachers. Mrs. Phillips, my first teacher at Ridgeway for grade 2. She was so kind, I couldn't believe it. And she set a standard in the classroom so that the kids, other than one boy, it really didn't bug and bother me. Whereas, some teachers allow bullying to go ahead. She never did, and she always did it in a kind way. So she was very good. And I had a Miss Johnson and a Mr. Anderson at that school, and they were very kind. And I realized how these teachers could make my day. I didn't want to be anywhere else. I loved being in the classroom. I certainly wasn't happy to go home. And I did not enjoy being out on the playgrounds. I did not run around. My older sister was much more athletic than I was. She could do skipping and all these fancy things. She did rock and roll dancing. She was great. She was really out there. Me, I was reclusive. And so when you have really good teachers, you know how important that is. And I really wanted to do the same for other kids. I think it's a really important thing to have good teachers. And when you've got one, it stays with you. And to this day, I probably get 100 birthday cards on my birthday from former students. I'm hearing from my kids who are working as lawyers in Cambodia. They live in Greece. Vancouver mothers take me out to dim sum at a steady rate. I'm invited to, I'm an honorary elder at the Musqueam Reserve. I feel that I have done for many of my students what my really good teachers did for me. And I do describe in the book the French teacher at my junior high, Sutherland Junior High, and she would really, buoy my confidence. And it's funny, the French teacher in high school, Mr. Siddall, he was the only person who came out to the airport to see us off to the Olympics. And I really treasured that. So, good teachers really make a difference in the lives of individual students. Yeah.
Ishi?
Just wanted to start with thanking you for your generosity of sharing all your stories with us. I'm born and raised in Vancouver, and if I'm not mistaken, I think back in '96 I got to run at the Valerie Jerome track meet. I think it was at Swangard Stadium. Yeah. If my memory is correct, I don't know. And I did the same events as you. 4x1, long jump, triple jump, high jump. So when you were telling those stories about performing, I got transported there. Obviously, I'm from a different generation than you, but I've experienced lots of anti-Semitism directly growing up in Vancouver. I experienced overt racism to friends of mine, like watching it at school on the
Yeah.
streets. And that's sadly still happening in 2023 in Vancouver, maybe to a lesser degree, I'm assuming.
Well, I don't know about a lesser degree, but speaking of anti-Semitism, I live in a condo and my neighbors on the main floor often drive their grandchildren to school in the morning. And because of cataract surgery and illness, I've often driven their children to school. And I was absolutely sickened by the fact that these young Jewish children go to school in the city of Vancouver with guards at their school. And it's been like that forever at their school. You drive into that parking lot and there are all of these security guards and they checked. I mean, I was not a regular person going through, so they checked the car and see why I'm the person in the parking lot at that point. And they've been doing this for decades. And why should that be necessary that children in this city, we look at these high schools in the United States where well, elementary schools too, I guess, shooters turn up. So now there are security people. Well, there are security people here in Vancouver too. And some children have gone to school their whole lives with security guards. And I'm devastated to think that, I know anti-Semitism exists. I know people still call people nigger all the time. I hear it. And, but I just, I don't know when we're going to change, but it's a sad commentary.
Yeah, I liked what you said about sort of the vetting, because you experienced teachers doing that, and we have a very kind of, I mean, not just teachers, but all sort of public facing people that are in positions of power. I just wonder how maybe you have any recommendations about how to sort of approach that in a good way, because we have some like overt examples here in Vancouver that need sort of addressing.
Well, I think that how we select people to enter the Faculty of Education, be it at Simon Fraser or UBC or wherever, I think when people are hired, I think they can be screened. I'm sure we have got tests for just about everything, for bias of all kinds. That's what marketers use all the time to sell us products. I cannot understand why, for example, this young man who didn't want to have to speak to a Jew lady, I just about, well, I won't comment. Anyway, and yet he was, the Faculty of Education was invested in pulling him out. And 2 years later, he was in the classroom. He got a job at Dickens School. It freaked me out. I don't understand why we shouldn't just say, because I don't think you cure anybody of racism, to tell you the truth. My poor mother-in-law tried really, really hard, and she still would let, I mean, she wasn't happy that I married her son, but then she was so worried how awful it would be for think of the children. Well, nobody loved my son more than his paternal grandmother. She really did love him. And I know she really loved me, but she would still let words fall out of her mouth that would just deeply offend me. And I'm sure she was trying really hard not to be that kind of person. And I don't know whether you can cure people of it. And so I say, we just need to screen people who go into teaching, who become our administrators. We need to be more diligent. I really believe in that. I know it sounds very, I don't know, maybe right wing, or maybe it sounds very exclusionary or doesn't allow for people's freedom, but heck, I've got a right to live freely without being hurt all the time, I'm on the board of a couple of dance companies here in Vancouver, and one of our dancers who comes here to dance with us is from Los Angeles. He has lived and worked in Germany and in The Hague. And he's a fabulous dancer, and I usually have him for lunch before they start rehearsals on their new pieces. And I always say to him, well, Jermaine, how many days do you think it's going to take you for, to be called nigger on the streets of Vancouver? Oh, it already happened today, is usually his thing. And first day he's here, he hears it on the streets of Vancouver. Now people can say, oh, I don't believe that, or I don't think that really happens. I don't care what other people say. I believe him. He lives in Los Angeles. He's not even called a nigger in Los Angeles. And yet, Vancouver, which I think one of our problems is we call this place British Columbia. And you know, British means the Union Jack, the King, the Queen. It means white. British doesn't mean anything other than, I'd like us to, Columbia's no better. It's, you know, named after Columbus. But for goodness sakes, you know, the British West Indies are not called British West Indies anymore. British Guyana is just called Guyana. All these British things, they've fallen off, these colonial names. I'm dying for British to fall off the name of this province. So for me, that would be a start.
Well, the next person with their hand up is someone who has been talking about exactly that for the last few years. Nora.
Oh, uh, thank you so much for your talk. It was really very, very wonderful. And I'm going to go out and buy the book. I'm actually from Windsor, Ontario, and I've only lived in British Columbia for the last, I guess, 2 decades. But yeah, that was something that hit me right away, British everywhere. It seems to me that that actually our education system tends to reinforce the idea of the superiority of the sort of Anglo-Western way of thinking. And because that's probably, I mean, recently it's been a bit better because now they're introducing more Indigenous culture, which is a wonderful thing. But in terms of, like, have you seen any changes as far as the curriculum with regard to, you know, other people in the world outside of North America, as far as how the curriculum maybe deals with people from other parts and maybe engenders respect for people beyond sort of the Anglo world?
Well, what I must say I have seen lately is the BC Teachers magazine, which is called Teacher. They actually produced an edition last year where all of the articles were written by non-whites. They excluded all submissions for that 1 month so that we could have other voices. When I used to receive Teacher magazine in my box at school, I'll tell you, not only was everything white, every photograph, every article, but it was almost policy. It was the standard by which everything was done. And now I know that the woman who edits that magazine, she put 3 South Asian women on the cover of the magazine, and boy, did she ever get a lot of complaints. No white people on the cover. So I do think the BC Teachers Federation is trying to do something. I know right now they have a committee working on curriculum and certainly broadening it. And so there's hope there. And I think that sometimes we have to jump in and make some of the changes happen. You know, it's not going to happen by somebody else. Sometimes it means us. And I'm really pleased with some of the steps BCTF has taken, because it has always been a very white organization. And I think their magazine now is filled with articles representing umpteen cultures, you know, not just 1 or 2. And to actually print a cover that has, you know, whites on the front and these 3 South Asian women, I have to say, you know, the reaction was expected that people would phone in and complain, but it's still nice that it was done, you know, and it should wake people up. So I think there are steps. I know the Vancouver School Board has got a curriculum committee going. I would love to be invited to be part of that, but you know, I think I'm so old I have nothing to contribute. But anyway.
Good to know that you would be interested, and we certainly will be mentioning that you would be interested if you don't mind us doing that.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Before Parker, who has his hand up and is patiently waiting, before Parker has his say, I just want to read you a couple of things from the comments because you might not have seen them yet, and I'll save the comments and save them to you for you later. But a couple of people who haven't said anything publicly, I will be buying your book and sharing it widely. Thank you for your time, your candor, and your grace, from Laura. Ian wrote, wow, 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 what a family. And there was a question here. Thank you for speaking tonight. This is Margaret Lung. Valerie, you discussed the desire to be recognized as just Canadian, and I can relate to that sentiment. I like your view. Oh, sorry, my thing is missing a word. Your view. How can we strike a balance between this and celebrating the different cultural origins in our country?
More people need to go out and broaden their circle of friends. You know, lately I've gone to a few funerals and I look at this, you know, congregation of 200 white people, and I think to myself, wow, so and so, who's recently deceased here, had a very narrow range of friends. And I think you don't have to go and, you know, polish somebody's shoes for them or kiss them or take them a cake, but you can just, you know, speak to people when you're at an event. Talk to somebody who doesn't look like you. Enlarge your circle of friends. That's what you need to do. And yes, people can celebrate all of their traditions as much as they want. The trouble is people overgeneralize. For example, people think that I eat Jamaican jerk chicken. Well, you know what? I was raised in North Vancouver. I never tasted jerk chicken until 10 or 15 years ago. You know, we all brown people aren't of the same culture. And I think people should celebrate their cultures. It doesn't mean that they have to make everybody in the neighborhood celebrate them, but we need to acknowledge that there are a diversity of cultures and cuisines, and certainly the cuisines from other countries have certainly smartened up. The old British boiled potatoes and boiled whatever it was, and you know, it's a much better cuisine now, and it's more than just their food. You know, it's the people themselves that you need to embrace. So I would really encourage people to just, you know, make a point of meeting other people who are not like you. That's important, you know.
And David did say there's nothing wrong with gatekeeping bigots.
I beg your pardon, there's nothing wrong with
Gatekeeping bigots in response to screening staff, in response to screening who's in front of our children. He was just responding that that doesn't sound too right-wing to him, I think. That there's nothing wrong with gatekeeping so that you have a safe experience, so that your grandchildren or, you know, your great nieces and nephews have a safe experience in school and the students.
It's like taking a knife to school to put a bigot in the classroom as the teacher. We don't allow other weapons in the classroom. Why this foul, you know, take on who people are? You know, it's just as dangerous. And sometimes it lasts longer than the scars from a knife, you know, lasts a lifetime. Anyway, somebody else had their hand up. So
Parker is actually going to, Parker has what he needs to ask you, and also Parker is going to thank you on behalf of all of us in a minute. Parker?
Yes, really want to thank you for what you shared this evening. And as someone who's a recent settler, immigrant to this territory that we call Canada, I came here in 2002, really appreciated hearing your story and look forward to reading it very much. And I used to run track, and I also coached my old high school in Massachusetts. But yeah, so it's really really been quite wonderful to see the statue of your brother and the Harry Jerome Center, where my daughter's also played volleyball there as well, and went to school here and is at York University currently. And I'm going to just put a plug out for her. She got recognized with 8 of her teammates on the women's volleyball team as an academic All-Canadian, which was quite impressive. And so, you know, we're pleased. And I do want to ask you about, given all the challenges you encountered, how did you evolve to embrace your Blackness and your African heritage as part of who you are when you were being told at home, at school, and in so many other places to devalue yourself and the culture and heritage and it, you know, as you mentioned, all of these things regarding the empire and its ongoing violent legacy. So I'm just curious
Well,
about.
I'll tell you what influenced me a lot in the, I used to think that people liked me only because I was Harry Jerome's sister, actually. And I even thought that was the reason my husband married me. Because I didn't really believe in myself. But in the 60s, Angela Davis made such an impact on me. I'm sure you've heard of her. A
Mhm,
marvelous,
mhm,
eloquent woman. And this Black is Beautiful theme came out. And so I grew you'll see my big afro if you get the book. I stopped straightening my hair. It was such a heinous procedure anyway, these burning hot combs that we kept on the electric
mhm,
element and burned our foreheads and whatever. Anyway, um, she had a big influence on me. She was smart. She pinpointed things in a way that and articulated them in a way that's never articulated here in our culture. And I also got to meet I met James Baldwin in 1962. That's also in the book. And
mhm,
a friend of mine here in Vancouver was a very good friend of Harry Belafonte's. So
mhm,
Mr. Belafonte used to come to town, and I found these people absolutely drop dead gorgeous, beautiful. They just lit up my life like you can't even imagine. And I used to want to be like Angela Davis. They tell me that now she's so far to the left I wouldn't like her, but I don't believe that. We all like role models, and I found some that were just, and my dad was a wonderful human being. He was
mhm,
so kind. He was so gentle. He never raised his voice, and he never raised his hand to any of us. And he was a much preferable parent than my mother. And I saw as a Black man, and he was good. And I saw Blackness as good.
mhm.
So yeah, anyway.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate hearing that. And also the celebration of Angela Davis. I am a big fan, and my daughter had a chance to meet her when she was in school and she was visiting Vancouver, and and interestingly, has read some of her writing when she was in high school, just because having met her, she got curious, and so
Yeah,
as you said, that exposure is so vital,
it
and
is. It is.
yeah, yeah. And so I do want to thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's so very important.
I'm happy to do it. It's not a problem. I was a teacher, I used to do all this kind of stuff all the time. So
Mhm.
thank you for having invited me. I'm very grateful for your interest. I really am. So
Well,
good
and
luck with
appreciate your story, and I know that I've been invited to say some closing words by Karen, and so um, it's my mother is she's a little bit further along past she's going to be 90 this year. So I'm hoping you will at least make it that far. I know you said some things about you don't know how much time you have left, but my mother has a friend who's 111. And she still
Ooh,
bridge games and still
wow.
lives on her own. So there is possibility out there.
Yeah, there
Um,
could be. I get that children's book written after all.
there you go. There you go. But I do really want to appreciate what you shared with us. I think the value of elders sharing their experiences or wisdom to understand the continuity of time and the transformation as well is really important. And hearing about people's lived experiences that can really help to deepen our understanding and appreciation of the place that we call home, and both what the struggles and triumphs are for people who have made it as such, and the way in which you and your brother and your family have carved such an importance and significant impact on here is greatly appreciated. And so, not your book, I think, and I'm looking forward to reading it, clearly sets a mark not only for yourself but also for your family, and if I might be so bold as to say, has you outside of the shadow of your brother.
Yeah.
Well, and that must have been hard having your older brother being, but also it sounds like he was a, great inspiration to you. So,
And I never felt I was in his shadow ever
oh,
at
good.
all. I
Okay.
ran close to him. So yeah.
Oh, great.
I-
Great. Well,
so-
let me not presume that. Thank you for that correction. And so I just do want to say it's such a pleasure to meet you and hear what you have to say. And as a person who's had a child go through the school system and had to fight through the school system, also to get police out of schools and to speak up about the anti-Black racism that she was encountering, that struggle does continue. And it's great to have so many people here who are listening to this who can also carry that forward to recognize our shared humanity and the importance that none of us are free until all of us are free. And these are shared struggles. And so I want to thank you for that again.
Great. Thank you.